We are full swing into the month of February of 2025, which means we are just another week closer to this thing we like to call March in the American Athletic Conference. It is right around the corner. We've got about a month remaining until Dickies Arena takes center stage of the American Conference Championships, tipping off in Fort Worth, Texas. Alongside Maria Trivelpiece, I'm Kyle Youmans. It's time to take a look through the last couple of weeks of action inside men's hoops in the American Conference, starting with the Memphis Tigers leading the way as they have throughout much of conference play. Maria, not a surprise that they're still up at the top of the standings.
It's not a surprise that they're up there, but there have been some close calls. They do have that one loss to Temple, and we saw them the other day almost lose to Temple once again, the Owls giving them a little bit of trouble. And so I think it's a testament to their grit and the culture that they've built. We'll talk a little bit about that later on, for them to still be at the top. UAB right behind them, and North Texas still hanging around. They had two falters, I'm going to call them, because I think that they're still a very good team, and I think they'll be playing in March as well, but we'll talk about that. But how about Tulane right after them? I think that's my biggest surprise, but I think it's something that we're definitely going to break down later on in the show.
Yeah, I think right now it's 1, 2, and 3. They're pretty clearly defined, even though there's only one loss between the three of them, or at least from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. These are the teams that I would have told you, at least at the beginning of the year, were going to be 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
Memphis, UAB, North Texas. These are some of the better teams in the conference. And then after that, they have a ton of teams following them that are still very, very good. Florida Atlantic we'll touch on. They've started to hit some stride. Their uber athleticism that we mentioned in the last show is starting to click, and it might be the right time for Florida Atlantic to click. We'll talk about that. Temple's had some big wins. UTSA had probably the biggest upset of the year in the American in terms of net ranking and record when they took down North Texas on the road, a little rivalry matchup that went in favor of the Roadrunners. But we do have to start with the Memphis Tigers. Penny Hardaway's bunch now inside the top 15 in the country. They are on an absolute tear. As Zach Fisher's graphic says below it, that's the perfect way to put it, because they're taking care of business where they should, and they're starting to put things together along the way from quad 1, quad 2. They have a couple quad 3 losses, which is probably why they're about 40, mid-40s of the net ranking. But, man, they're still a fun team to watch, and they're going to be dangerous in March.
I'm excited to watch them in March and the way that they finish out this American Conference slate. And, it was really interesting when I was doing the Rice-Memphis game earlier this month. We talked to Penny Hardaway and asked him what's a little bit different about this team, because I think we've seen in the past the fact that, they'll lose some of those closer games or they fall apart as the season goes on. And he said, as I've been coaching in college, I kind of changed my approach in the way that I'm recruiting players. He said, I am going to first and foremost look at character, then look at fit, and then I'm going to look at talent. He said, when I first started coaching, I would just pick who are the best players, let's put them on the court together. And he realized that didn't work. And I think that you now see that character and that fit coming into play because they're winning those close games. Memphis is getting everybody's best game, no matter what. They will consistently get everybody's best shot, and they're still coming out victorious because I think they're finally developing a culture that wants to win together and for each other, and that's why they've been on a tear, as the graphic says.
No doubt. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. When you are the far and away favorite in a certain league, and this goes for any team across the country, whether you're playing in the American or you're playing in the West Coast Conference, you're playing in the Sun Belt, whatever it may be, if you're the top team in that league, and it's a league that has the depth like the American does, you're going to see some tight games, and you're going to have to win those tight games. They are better built to do that because of the wide range of players that they have that are making an impact. Dane Danger, I think, is really one of the biggest ones that have taken a step forward. I know Rogers is kind of an X factor in that regard as well. But it's not just one guy. It's not just P.J. Haggerty, who is, of course, putting up Player of the Year numbers. It's the depth that Penny Hardaway has at his disposal that I don't think he's necessarily had in the past.
Absolutely, and I think that you see it in both aspects because you have the post play there's some depth there as well. And then the guards, I think we talked about the guards, I think, in our first episode. They are really good.
Super.
I mean, there's Haggerty, but then you have Tyrese Hunter. And the one thing about him is he can have an impact on this team even when he's not scoring. He does a great job handling the ball. He has great vision, but he's also such a leader. So obviously he'll get his points. He gets his shots up. He's a really great shooter, but his leadership, you can tell, like just in the huddles, just around the team. He's been around college basketball for a bit, and so I think that's helped tremendously.
Oh, yeah.
Now I want to go back to Dane Danger a little bit, because one interesting thing was he wasn't starting for a little bit. He started at the beginning of the year, and then he went for a period of time when he was coming off the bench, and you see his numbers. They're just phenomenal in the last couple of weeks, last 5 games or so. But I think one thing that Penny wanted to do was make sure that he had an offensive threat coming off the bench in those non-conference games that he talked about. Now when they're back in conference play, they're bringing him in, they're starting him, and he's getting his points. And he's really making a statement to say, hey, I think I want to be in this starting lineup more often.
Well, and not to mention when they have the backcourt as dangerous as they do with the 2 guards of Haggerty and Hunter, you need a front court that's going to provide some level of production when those guys aren't hitting. Now, it's rare that those guys aren't hitting, but when you've got Danger that can be a reliable target in the post, it's going to continue to put guys on notice from the front court to the back court, and the entire defense has to be aware of that. His effectiveness, I guess, what is that? Is it effectiveness a word?
Yeah, effectiveness is a word.
Is that a
yeah.
word?
If it wasn't, I would troll you and make
you.
fun of you. So,
and
yeah,
so
no,
we're
it's a
gonna
word.
Just keep on rolling. Just like Danger has been. He's been so efficient in that game against Temple that you mentioned. Temple gave them another scare, kind of kept it close all the way throughout, and Memphis had the depth to pull it off at home. 5 of 7 from the field. He goes to the free throw line often because teams don't know how to guard him effectively because he's so athletic in the low block. He gets hacked quite a bit, goes 8 of 10 from the free throw line. And this is not just against Temple. This is really throughout the year. Through conference play, there's only been a couple times he's been held under 50% from the field. That was against Wichita State, which kind of an outlier, weird game against the Shockers initially, and then that first loss against Temple. So they need him to step up in a big way and be efficient, and he's done that. He's hitting those shots. He's shooting over 50% for the season, and in conference play even higher than that. If Danger is effective, then you're going to be a dangerous Memphis Tigers team.
So if Danger's effective, they have P.J. Haggerty, Tyrese Hunter. How far is this Memphis team going? We talked about some of those big wins, but we also talked about some of those losses.
Sure.
Where do you see them as it progresses in March?
Well, remember in our first basketball episode, I said I want to see more consistency.
Yep.
We're seeing that.
We're seeing
that all the way across. We're seeing the depth. This is exactly what you want to see because they lost by 14 to the number 1 team in the country right now, the Auburn Tigers, or what was the number 1 team in the country before they lost this past weekend. Arkansas State was a weird loss early on as well, and then Mississippi State, another SEC school that's gone through the gauntlet as well. So right now, if we're looking at Joe Lunardi's bracketology, they are a 5 seed in the tournament. They are 5 seed taking on the 12 seed George Mason. So just let's play a hypothetical game. Are you down to play a hypothetical game?
I like
with me?
games. Do I have a potential to beat you in this game?
No.
Okay.
Unless we disagree, and then we'll see what happens.
Okay,
but
continue.
Pretty much not.
That makes it not as fun. But anyway.
I want to run through what their bracket would look like, and we'll see if they're going to the Elite Eight or not. So we're going to go regionals into regional final.
Let's do it.
George Mason is their first matchup, 12 seed. Win or loss?
Win.
I think it's a win as well.
Yeah.
I think that's. I know a lot of times the 12 over 5 is a heavy upset or a happy upset in March Madness. Not this time. Then they would face the winner of Michigan State and Arkansas State, the same team that beat them the first time around. Do they beat them again, or does Michigan State take them down?
I think that Memphis wins because Memphis plays up to the better teams that they play against.
I agree.
Yep.
And I think if Arkansas State or Memphis State, which is right now what they're projected to see if they win round 1, I think if either one of those teams are there, I think Memphis is built better than Michigan State. And I think Arkansas State caught them once. They're not going to catch them again.
I don't think they beat them twice.
So there you go. On to the Sweet 16. Well, then they would play a combination of one of these 4 teams. Auburn, who beat them the first time around by 14. Creighton, Baylor, or American as the 16 seed. So we'll just kind of say Americans off to the side. It'll be Auburn, Creighton, or Baylor. One of those 3. I think the only team that I would be concerned about out of those trio against Memphis would be Auburn.
Yeah.
That's the only team, and Johnny Broome and company, that's the only team that I would be worried about in that point. So right now we're talking about a team that could go Elite Eight and further
Right.
if they had a good enough season and maybe the road works out the way that it does.
I agree with you on that. And I think if you take a look at some of the better teams they played and just even better teams in the American that they played, they handle the better teams better. And I wish I could use another adjective.
Sure.
Let's talk about UAB because that's the example
That's a
that
good
I
one.
want to
Yeah.
use. They beat them. I think it was like in the hundreds to 77. That game was a little bit.
77.
Was I right?
100,
Wow,
right on
look
the
at that. I think about a lot of numbers. But since that game, UAB has been playing a lot better, so I think we need to talk about them. Memphis handles the good teams. They did handle UAB, but the Blazers been on a roll ever since then.
No doubt about it. And UAB as the preseason favorite in the conference, it's pretty incredible that they're still outside of the top 100 in the net rankings right now. And a big reason for that is because UAB had that non-conference back and forth that we had talked about. They didn't have the same level of success that Memphis did in the non-con that has them set up better in these national rankings, because I get it. It's all analytic-driven, yet this is one of the top 50 teams in the country when they're playing well.
Right.
No doubt in my mind. And right now they are playing very good basketball. Had that tight win at home against North Texas. That was probably a game where they wanted to get over the hump, and Andy Kennedy and company needed that one to really solidify their confidence level moving forward. And they get Memphis at home at the beginning of March. So pretty much the next time that we're talking about the men's game on this show, we will have seen or we'll be going into that Memphis game later in the campaign. So there's still a lot at stake for UAB, and I still think there's a road where they can win this conference because there is a lot of time left and they're through kind of the tough part of their schedule, and they're building that confidence like we talked about, playing good defense, good offense, and they've got a guy like Yaxel Lendeborg that's just on another level right now.
Yeah, we have to break down Yaxel Lendeborg in a little bit. Right before we get to that, though, I want to talk about this team just playing in the postseason, though, because that's something that you touched on a little bit, is just the fact that they know how to win later in the season. And Andy Kennedy in particular knows how to win later in the season. And you talked about that as well. And I remember back at Media Day, we were talking to Tony, and I asked him, like, why'd you come back to UAB? You could have maybe gone somewhere else. And he specifically pointed out the fact that Andy Kennedy knows how to win championships, and he wanted to be a part of that again. He already was a part of a few of those championship teams, and so I think that little added element really helps when you're trying to get guys to rally around you, so that you play well throughout the conference season, but at the end of the day, when you want to get that at-large bid, you have to win the conference tournament. Andy Kennedy and UAB knows how to do that.
Yeah, they did it last year, of course. They've done it in Conference USA even before they made the jump to the American. Andy Kennedy, one of 5 active head coaches with 20-plus win seasons in 14 of their last 17 campaigns. Pretty good couple of coaches here that he's a part of. John Calipari, who's, of course, now at Arkansas and had the career that he did at Kentucky. Mark Few, who's had a ton of great teams over time. Jamie Dixon, who, of course, was at TCU and continues to win even up to this point. And then Thad Matta, who's always one of the top coaches in the country. They put together winners underneath Andy Kennedy. He did it at Ole Miss. He's doing it at his alma mater at UAB. And, yes, they know how to win late. And having players like Yaxel certainly works in their favor.
I think it was our producer, Zach Fisher, who said Yaxel continues to Yaxel. And I think that's the best way to describe it. That young man is averaging a double.
It's becoming a verb?
Yeah, Yaxel. I think we should maybe make that a hashtag on social media. Maybe if we can get it trending, I think that could be
Yaxel gonna Yaxel.
Yaxel gonna Yaxel. Maybe we can make a graphic on it. I don't know, or a TikTok. But to describe what Yaxel beginning or continuing to Yaxel is, that graphic kind of says it all. He's averaging 18.8 points per game, 11.4 rebounds per game. And that's just within conference. He's been fantastic this entire year in the non-conference as well. And I think there's a little bit added pressure when you come in as the preseason player of the year, right? Because now everybody knows what your game is like, and he just continues to dominate but despite that fact. And so I think that that's a big reason why the Blazers are starting to get back to where they needed to be, is because Yaxel never stopped Yaxeling, and he just keeps doing it.
Well, and remember, he won the Player of the Week honors a couple weeks back after 24 points per game, 12 rebounds per game, and 8 assists over Tulane and Florida Atlantic, and a couple of wins that he was able to put together. And if you look at all these numbers, if we keep those numbers up for just a couple more moments here, you go back to what his Player of the Year honor was last year, or Defensive Player of the Year honor too. 14 points per game, 11 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks. He's having a better year than he had last year.
Yep.
And he's upping his game from what he did last year, and he probably has more talent around him than he did last year too.
Yep.
So with all of that being said, UAB is still certainly a dangerous team to keep an eye on, and continues to showcase why Andy Kennedy's a great coach, why Yaxel is a Player of the Year candidate, and why Memphis can't sleep just yet because they play again March 2nd. I'm going to repeat that. That's the game of the year right now in the men's side
of the
American Conference. I cannot wait for that matchup down at Bartow Arena. One team that has some length, that has some athleticism that we've mentioned on this show before, and has won in the postseason as well, but just not under their current head coach. Florida Atlantic starting to find their rhythm across the board. The Owls are starting to fly again. They're clicking on all cylinders, facing a favorable schedule, but they're not just winning games, Maria.
No.
They are absolutely dismantling teams right now, and that's the biggest thing to me. The most impressive win was one of their more recent ones against South Florida, a team that, of course, we know has had some ups and downs this year. We'll touch on the Bulls momentarily, but FAU beat them 94-72. And they outscored them 46-37 in the first half and 48-37 in the second half. They led the entire way at Baldwin Arena on national television and just took them to town. Florida Atlantic, watch out. They are legit.
You know, you said this the last time we talked men's hoops, so we're going to have to pull those clips again if you are correct once again. But you mentioned them beating South Florida 94-72. But how about the game before that? They scored 94 in that game against UTSA. Their last game, they put up 79 against Tulsa. They've won 3 of their last 4 games. That only loss comes to North Texas. They scored 64 points in that because we know that North Texas is constantly trying to slow teams down.
And they led for a lot of that game, too.
Exactly. And so I think that this offense is something that's really exciting to watch from Florida Atlantic. And when it's clicking, it's really clicking. And I wouldn't even look at that North Texas loss as a bad loss, right? Because that's one of the top teams in the league, and you're right there with them. And so I think that exactly what you said, they know how to make it pretty far in the postseason as well, obviously under a different head coach. But their offense is moving. And I think you look at their upcoming schedule. They have Charlotte, Temple, Wichita State. Those are all winnable games for them. This could be a turning point in the season for the Owls.
Very much so. And you took the words right out of my mouth, because you've got those winnable games coming up. This could be a 6-game win streak before they face Memphis, North Texas, and then they go on the road against South Florida and UAB. So it will get harder again for Florida Atlantic. It's going to get tough, because they go on the road and play at FedEx Forum against Memphis on February 23rd, and then they turn around, get back to Boca, and they play North Texas.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
If Memphis ends up winning, that is a tough one. If they end up beating Memphis on the road at FedEx Forum, I may make a bet with Florida Atlantic Nation that I would just buy a plane ticket and go watch that North Texas FAU game in Boca. Yeah. Just for fun. I might do that.
Just for funsies?
Yeah, just for funsies. We'll go All-American on site, because I would be excited to watch that.
Will you bring the babies with you? Because I think that'd be fun.
That would be fun. Beach babies. We can make it happen. Get the triplets down there.
I would love that, yes.
We'll see what we can do. I'll try and talk my wife into going to Boca Raton. I'm sure she'll be okay.
Twist her arm.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack here, though, with Florida Atlantic. And it's not just the way that they're out playing teams, it's the efficient play that they're doing it, because one of the big bugaboos is, yes, they put up a lot of numbers, but that's because they play a high tempo of offense, they play a ton of possessions, and they're not super efficient in doing so. Well, they've been efficient. In that win against South Florida, they put up 56% field goal in that game. They shot 56% from the field. So if you're averaging 81 points per game, you're putting up and making half of your shots, and you're having a ton of possessions, that's just math. You're going to score a lot of points, and you're going to beat a lot of teams. And that's why North Texas is such a tough matchup with them. But when you're playing Memphis, Florida Atlantic can beat Memphis, because you're going to outpace them. And Memphis is built to withstand that, but you're going to see the athleticism and the talent from FAU. This team's not done winning games yet. I bet you by the time we get to that Memphis game, they'll have won 6 straight. They're going to be right there in the thick of this conference race as well. Don't count out the Owls, because they're starting to be efficient. And they've got some depth, Maria. There are multiple guys that they can rely on. We're not just talking about P.J. Haggerty and Tyrese Hunter. We're not just talking about Adam Wright and Jasper Floyd. We're talking about guys like the depth top to bottom that this team has put together. and I love the outlook that this Florida team has.
Well, when you take a look at that
Florida Atlantic.
when you take a look at that graphic right there, you just see how many guys have been able to score the basketball, and I think that just helps so much, especially when you're talking about the pace that they play at and the tempo that they want to move and run at. You can't just have one lineup of guys in there the entire time. They're going to get too tired. They're not going to be able to produce. And so the fact that you have multiple people who can score in double digits on any given night, that helps your team, and that really plays to the kind of basketball that they want to execute. And I think that's probably why you're seeing the consistency and the efficiency, because you don't have to play as many minutes in that high tempo, up pace type of scheme. You get a little rest, somebody else goes in and picks up where you left off, and then you can come back in with fresh legs. And I think that's a big reason why Florida Atlantic is beginning to see the success that they are right now, because they're finally getting in a rotation that's working for them. It reminds me of what North Texas says, that they don't really have any starters or bench players. They're kind of all moving as one. Now they do that more with like the defensive mindset. I think Florida Atlantic is kind of bringing that same principle, but offensively with guys that are now scoring and are more efficient.
You know, one thing, and I haven't talked to John Jacobs. He's apparently a great human being. Comes from the Scott Drew coaching tree at Baylor. So I've interacted with him before, but haven't been able to talk to him. I bet you if you asked him how he's managed those minutes, I bet you he's learned along the way. He's learned a better way. It's his first year as a head coach in collegiate Division I athletics, and you have so many different talents along the way. I mean, Baba Miller is an athletic freak.
Oh, yeah.
He is a dude.
We're going to see something from him later today.
Okay, great.
Just a little
great
preview.
to see. I have a feeling I know which one that one was. He was an honorable mention, American Conference honorable mention this past week. He put up 17 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists, 5th double-double of the year against the Tulsa Golden Hurricane. And then he also went lights out from beyond the arc, 3 for 3 on the day as well. And then Trey Carroll, that guy's a future pro. He's going to be playing somewhere, whether it's overseas or the G League or as a two-way or in the NBA, whatever it ends up being. Leland Walker is the one that puts all the puzzle pieces together. He's the facilitator on offense, great passer, good vision. He's able to kind of work things down the floor. I really do like what Florida Atlantic has brought to the table. And I've said it before, I'm a fan of John Jacobs. I'm a fan of his system, and I think you're starting to see all those puzzle pieces come together. The next time they're going to be tested is against the Memphis Tigers. That's where I keep saying it. As long as they can continue doing their job, I'm not a coach, so I can look ahead. They can't look ahead.
Nope, one game at a time. One game at a time.
We're going to move right past Charlotte and get ready for – no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You got to continue doing it. But as a media member, I can circle that matchup and say they're going to challenge Memphis. This is going to be a good game.
And as a media member, you've covered another team in this league for a very long time, and that would be North Texas.
Getting close to 10 years.
Oh, my goodness. That means you're old. But anyway, still at the top part of the American Conference. They did stumble a little bit. They went 2-2 overall in the last 2 weeks. You were on the call of one of those losses, am I correct?
UTSA.
Yeah, in UTSA. So from your perspective, what did you see? What do you think? Is it panic mode time, or is it just, two basketball games that kind of fell from their grasp?
No, if you look at their 3 conference losses right now, one of them was on the road against Memphis. One of them was on the road against UAB, and the other one was at home against UTSA. And I said it at the top of the show. That is the biggest upset in the American so far this season, because Memphis hasn't lost a game like that. They lost to Temple, who's 5th in the standings. UAB has lost to Memphis, and they've lost to North Texas, who are 1 and 3 in the standings. North Texas is sitting at number 3, and they lost to a UTSA team that was outside of the top 50 in the net and is in the bottom half of the conference. So, yes, it's the biggest upset of the season. Is it panic mode? No. If you see another half where they put up 13 points against that UTSA team, that's when I'm going to have some concern. They do struggle at times to score, and that's not a secret. They like to slow the game down, but you got to have the wherewithal, and I'm sure Ross Hodges has already had this conversation with his staff and with his players. You got to go and shoot. You got to get up there, and you got to have that attack mentality. You can't just settle for saying, you know what, we're a defensive team. We only scored 13 points in the first half. That's okay. That's what we do. No, put up some points. You got some scorers. You got some guys. Latrell Giselle, Jonathan Massey, both of those guys had great games last time out against Tulane. I think for the most part, you're going to have their depth stretched because they do stay on the floor for so long, because they do play such a high intensity level of defense. but you got to score. You got to find a way to do it. And if you can't hit the hot hand early, find somebody else. And Adin Wright's been up and down. He had such a great start to conference play that I think Adin Wright is still that honed-in scorer that teams try and take away from North Texas. Brennan Lorient kind of stepped up when Adin Wright didn't have some great games. Lorient stepped in to that spotlight, and now teams are starting to adjust and trying to take him away. So it's going to have to be the third or fourth guy on the list of top scorers that are going to help North Texas kind of set the pace on offense.
So it's just figuring out that, in your opinion, it's just figuring out that offense and then figuring out who that maybe next scorer is.
Correct.
And then there were some miscues, mistakes, a couple turnovers, just things
that
they
didn't shoot the ball well.
Yeah.
They went from 9 turnovers a game over the two, or before that, to the 2 losses where they had 15 or 16 turnovers per game. And they didn't shoot the ball well. Look at that. Left side versus right side in terms of field goal percentage. But the real big bugaboo was that 3-point percentage overall. That's where they had some struggles.
Yep, and you could see it just so clearly on the graphic. And that's why shout out to I know the rest of the words, but I'm not going to say.
The rain is gone.
I think we should cut his mic. I was giving credit to Zach Fisher for making this graphic because it just so easily demonstrates the story of what the slight falter, where the slight falter is coming from in North Texas's 2 losses. But again, I don't think we hit the panic button anytime soon. They're still one of the best teams in this conference. Their defense is fantastic. And when you get somebody like Adin Wright or Brennan Lorient going again, you're going to be just fine. Honestly, if you want to have a stumble, this is the time to do it. Pick back up as we get closer to March. But one team that stumbled earlier in the year and is now picking things up is the Tulane Green Wave, and they have been very impressive, super surprising, because I think when we saw their non-conference, everybody was questioning a little bit where Tulane would be.
Oh, I was definitely questioning.
Yeah. But Ron Hunter has turned this thing around.
Yep.
He's getting his guys in positions to succeed. And
speaking of turning things around, this is their win probability chart against UTSA. They rattled off 10 unanswered points in the final 2 minutes to win that game, 61-60. Look at the right side of your screen.
I'm not on the screen right now, but my jaw is just like on the floor right now. I'm like,
well, that's exactly what their chances were initially prior to making the run that they did late, because they not only had the 10 unanswered points late to win it, but they had to kind of maneuver a comeback on the road at the Convocation Center in order to do so. They ended up losing the next game to North Texas, but I think when you leave with a split, and this is how you earn the split, I think you're okay for Tulane.
Yeah, I think there's nothing to worry about there. I've just been so impressed with that entire team and the way that they didn't just stop and say, you know what, we're going to throw in the towel. Non-conference play was not what we wanted it to be. They had a lot of young guys. They had a lot of new guys. They're trying to figure out how to play with those people in the system that Ron Hunter wants them to play in. And I think he made some adjustments as well. You have Woods and Brombaugh. They're starting to step up. And I think just looking at some of those things, it makes the conversation a little bit more interesting as we get later in the American Conference slate, because, you know, you have your North Texas, you have your Memphis, and you have your UAB, but Tulane just still hanging around, trying to make a case for themselves.
Yeah, it's right there with that Florida Atlantic team that we just talked so in depth about, where I think Florida Atlantic you expected to be good, and they may have stumbled early because they were trying to click. Tulane, it was all about conference. You can tell that there was a very heavy focus on taking care of business inside the American brackets, because they lost to Furman, they lost to Belmont, Southeast Louisiana, George Mason, Florida State, all in the non-conference. And then you turn around and you've rattled off all these wins, and you're sitting at a solid 4th place at a 7-4 mark. And your 4 losses haven't been bad losses: Temple, Memphis, North Texas, and UAB. The 4 teams that are right there in front of you for the most part, except for Temple. So I'm still very confident in Tulane. And like you said, they're playing great defense. They guard the perimeter exceptionally well. Didn't really do so against North Texas. Kind of made it tight late by clamping back down on the outside. But they ranked first in opponents' field goal percentage. They ranked second in opponents' 3-point percentage. And they're one of the top teams in the country in terms of opponents' field goal defense all the way through. You got to find consistency from your top scorers. That's the only thing I've got to say. Kind of like what we talked about with North Texas a moment ago, but it's a little bit more emphatic with Caleb Banks. Banks, over the last 2 games against UTSA and North Texas, has been held underneath the 10-point mark. Transfer from Indiana, averages 16 a game, 3-point shooter. He was a great high school player, unbelievable high school player. Gatorade Player of the Year in Georgia, scored over 2,000 high school points. Greg Glenn, 6'7", got some great length to him. They've tried to get him going. He's a rebounding machine, continue to feed him the rock. But then, like you said, you got Woods and Brumball that are doing their part. Brumball's scored double figures in 20 straight games and 21 times this year where he's had at least.
Is that good?
That's an actual stat. That's not just me making up a number. It's literally 20 straight games that he's had at least 10 points. It's tremendous. He's an incredible player. Asher Woods is an all-around player. If you can put 4 of those 5 guys together, oh, look, there's the 2 guys right there, Brumball and Woods. If you can put Banks and Glenn with these guys and continue pushing this Tulane team forward with all 4 of those guys, I don't know if there's a better starting 5, maybe other than Memphis in the conference.
And it just comes down to them being consistent, exactly like you said, because there's the talent is there. There's
the average is there.
The averages are there, but it's just being consistent in the games that they need to be consistent in. They're beating the teams that they quote unquote maybe should be and losing to the teams that they maybe are expected to lose to. If they're more consistent, they'll be able to beat some of those teams at the top of the conference. Now, I want to transition to another team that's been kind of up and down. They had a big win against Temple, and that's South Florida, and it was a very special day honoring Amir Abdur-Rahim.
Amir Abdur-Rahim's family and friends looking on as they named Amir Abdur-Rahim as the 2025 American Conference Honorary Coach of the Year.
In conjunction with this award, the American is proud to make a donation in the amount of $15,000 to the Future Foundation. Here to accept the donation on behalf of the Future Foundation is Sharif Abdur-Rahim. The American has announced the establishment of the Amir Abdur-Rahim Sportsmanship Award. Please join us in a round of applause as we celebrate the legacy of one of college basketball's best coaches and ambassadors, Coach Amir Abdur-Rahim.
You hear that AAR being chanted in the background, and that's exactly what it sounded like when they presented that award at South Florida on Thursday night. It was certainly an emotional night, and everybody in the crowd felt that, but it was also a wonderful honor for him and his family. And, you know, I was at the game, and especially like seeing the young children there, it was really, really difficult. But the amount of people that showed out for that game and the Love Win shirts and just the way that everybody spoke about him, it really showed the kind of human that he was and the kind of respect that his players also have for him and how much he is missed and will continue to be missed.
Yeah, I've spoken on this show a couple times about AAR and get to know him, and I shared even a story during one of our football shows about how he impacted me and my family in a tough time in our lives as well, just as a basketball coach on a coach's call going into a broadcast. So I can't even imagine the type of impact that he had throughout the Tampa community and South Florida as a whole. I can only speak to the 3 or 4 times that we interacted, and that just made me emotional looking at it and seeing it. I've got to know his brother Sharif too. He's now the president of the G League. I've done some G League broadcasting in the past, so knowing the whole Rahim family and seeing the impact and the heartbreak all together. It's such a range of emotions, and I'm sure the building felt like that at the Yingling Center as they did honor him throughout. It was a cool moment. I watched it on TV, and it was a little emotional watching it in the process, and so seeing it again there is pretty impressive. And the team has had some ups and downs, plain and simple, and that's going to happen whenever there's a tragedy like this that strikes the individuals that are on the roster, strikes the coaches that are on the roster. I mean, I don't think there's a tougher coaching gig in the country than what Ben Fletcher is trying to do as the interim head coach, filling in for Amir Abdur-Rahim. But they're doing an upstanding job of doing so. They've played their hearts out. That's one thing that I will always give credit to the Bulls. And they were like that even before the championship season last year in the regular season when they were the top seed going into the tournament. They will never quit. And we've seen that a number of times throughout their season so far. maybe not the most talented team. They don't have that same level of roster talent that they had last year. But, man, they play all the way up into that final whistle. And they have some games where they're going to win against some big teams coming up.
Well, when they are all gelling, they have that tenacity that maybe some other teams don't, because as you said, the talent might not be there every single night and in every single way, but especially on that night and Thursday when they played Temple, a double overtime game every time.
Awesome.
Oh my goodness, it went almost 3 hours.
Yeah.
It was insane. And so every time you thought that, maybe the Bulls were out of it a little bit, they'd make a big shot and they'd get back into it. And I think it just spoke to the specialness of that night and that moment, because I think that they were playing the way that Amir Abdur-Rahim would be really proud of, the way that they fought back, and they had a little bit more to play for on that night as well. And so I think that when you see them playing in those atmospheres, and when you see them playing with that little extra oomph, making the big plays, one thing I will say about them, I feel like I'm always deciding between a couple like big dunks and like big moments when I'm looking at top plays, because they do have those instances where they just give a little bit extra. And I think that that's a team that, again, they've had ups and downs. They beat Temple, they lose to Wichita State. But in the tournament, you just have to win one game at a time. So you can't count them out of it yet, because they were upset in the tournament last year. Can they be the one doing the upsetting this season?
They're talented to do that. They're talented enough to do that. And one guy that I want to spotlight is Jamil Reynolds. He wears the number 2 for South Florida, and he's a St. Petersburg native. So he's a nearby hometown prospect, 6'11", 267, and boy, is he a bully down low. Over the last 3 games, he's led the team in not only scoring, but also rebounding. He had 15 and 10 in a loss against Florida Atlantic. We just talked about what the Florida Atlantic squad's been doing. With that 2 overtime win, he put up a 25-point, 12 rebound double-double, and then put up 18 and 6 against Wichita State in a tight loss at home against the Shockers. So when Reynolds is playing at such a high level, it opens the door for guys like Reed and Knox and Williams to try and kind of fill in the gaps. I like him being that forefront initially. I think if Reynolds is the guy to continue pushing this team forward, that's a good sign for what they're going to do come March.
Well, he does a lot on his own and just creating opportunities for himself, and the way that you mentioned he rebounds, and the way that he's a big presence underneath. And I think one thing that has been really helpful in the games that South Florida has won is when his teammates find him. I think Reed does a really good job of distributing to Reynolds. And again, when you have that combination of him finding him and then also creating his own shots, he becomes quite lethal. And then if you get 1 or 2 other guys also producing in that same game, South Florida has a chance to win basketball games. It's just kind of figuring out what we talked about with some of the other teams in this show, the consistency of it. When they're high, they're really high. They play some really good basketball, but sometimes they dip and make a little bit of too many mistakes that cost them in the end.
No doubt about it. And you saw the fight it was a crazy game, the South Florida Temple game. If you haven't watched it yet, just do yourself a favor. Go back and watch it. You don't even have to watch the whole thing. I would start with about the 10-minute mark in the second half.
Yeah.
Fast forward to the 10-minute mark in the second half. Do yourself a favor. If you're a fan of college basketball, it was one heck of a game. Speaking of Temple and the Owls, I mean, this is another team that has had some ups and downs, kind of like what South Florida has had. That was it down, the 2 overtime loss against South Florida. Well, guess what? They had a 2 overtime win against Charlotte just a week prior. So, yes, they've had some weird games back and forth, including, how about the 3 straight games with 90 points or more? First time they've done that in program history. And remember, this is one of 6 programs in the country that has won 2,000 games in their history. So they've won a couple of games here and there. Well, they're putting up 90-plus points. The only thing that's a problem is they won 2 of those and they lost 1, and then they lost 1 where they allowed 90 points against Memphis.
Right. So, and I think that's the thing with this team is they have the capability to beat the good teams. We saw them beat Memphis. We know that their offense is clicking. And the one thing I want to point out about their offense as well is the fact that in that South Florida game, it was gelling, right?
Yeah.
Jamal Mashburn didn't play in that game.
Yeah.
That's one of the leading scorers, not only in the American, but in the country. So they were without him, and they still found ways to score. I think that Elijah Gray is starting to come on really well. He was out for a little bit with injury. He was more of a role player. He kind of hit that turn in the Memphis game. He did get injured, but starting to look really good. So I think if they can kind of figure out how to clean up some of those mistakes, and I know that sounds very generic, but maybe find a way to win the big games. Their offense is there. They have the talent. And we know that they can beat good teams. It's just putting it all together at this point.
I kind of want to counteract this a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
I agree with what you're saying, and we've talked about depth on this show and how much it does matter in March, and I completely agree. You're going to need guys like Tobias and Settle and Gray and Stanford to step up in a big way. But when you have a player like Jamal Mashburn, I need him to be the guy. I need him to be the guy. And over the last 10 games, they're 5-5, right? So they're 5 wins, 5 losses. I'm going to read off the leading scorer in each of these games,
All right, let's hear it.
Okay. Mashburn, 4. Then it goes Barry for 1 against North Texas. They lost that game. Then it goes Mashburn, Stanford, Tobiasen. And I know he's a little banged up at one of those points along the way and didn't play against South Florida. They are in the games 5-5, right, within the last 10 games. All 5 of those wins came when he was the leading scorer. All 5 of them.
Right.
Now, they had 2 losses where he wasn't the leading scorer, but then they lost the games like Stanford, Tobiasen, and Barry. Those 3 games along the way where they lost to North Texas, South Florida, and Memphis, all good teams, all teams that we've already talked very highly of, they did not have Mashburn as the leading scorer. He needs to be the guy. He's so talented, unbelievable talent, shooting ability, driving ability, ball handling. It opens up shooters around him. So, yes, he's going to facilitate, and that's where you're going to have Settle. That's where you're going to have Tobias, and that's where you're going to have Barry and Stanford and all these guys different from Mashburn step up in a big way. But if Temple's going to get where Temple wants to go, which is back to the American title game like they had last year, they're going to ride on the scoring capability and the overall talent of a guy like Jamal Mashburn Jr., who's a first-team all-conference honoree, should be at least at this point in the season with everything he's done. Ride it. Let him be your hot hand. Don't try and do too much and get too cute with it. Let him lead you to the promised land because he's good enough to do so.
See, I don't think that's a counteract. I agree with that point as well.
It's more of just context around it.
Right,
because
right.
Like I said, I don't want to disagree with depth. You need depth in this league. Plain and simple. You're not going to go to the tournament
without depth,
or go through the tournament without the depth, because it's not going to just be PJ Haggerty or Yaxel Lindeborg or whoever it ends up being. For those top teams, it's going to be a number of guys. But with Temple, you just happen to have a guy that's playing at an elite level.
Yes.
Use it. That's all I'm trying to ask.
All right, I'm going to agree with you on that one
Okay,
as well.
I like it. All good. All right, let's move on to UTSA. And we talked about them a little bit earlier. The UTSA Roadrunners with the biggest upset win of the season, a 54-50 win on the road against North Texas. I happened to be on the call for that game. And let me tell you, let's rewind a little bit. All the way back to the start of basketball season. I was very, very happy with UTSA making the hire of Austin Klotch. What he brings from a knowledge and a energy and a recruiting example after 5 years, great years at Nicholls State. Then he goes to Alabama. He's underneath Nate Oates, goes to this thing they call the Final Four with Alabama and the Crimson Tide.
I've never heard of it.
It's a football school, and he helped take him to a Final Four. And I've had, of course, a basketball crush on Austin Klotch forever. I even told him that before
I
the
really
game.
want to clip that. Can we clip that? You have a basketball crush?
Yeah, it's a basketball crush. I'm
Okay.
saying it on the air. So Klotch is a really, really good coach. And I know there are a lot of San Antonio personnel, a lot of UTSA fans that are kind of impatient. They want to see winning. And I get it, because they've had some winning in all their other sports, football, baseball, women's basketball. Doing what they're doing this year doesn't necessarily help. Give it time, because you're going to get wins like that. You're going to get wins like on the road against North Texas. They're going to get another win. I think they're going to knock off another top team by the end of this regular season. And then when it gets to the tournament time, if you had to tell me one team's going to have a double-digit number next to their name and end up playing in the semifinals or the finals, I would put my money on the Roadrunners.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question then. So you watch them play against North Texas.
Yeah.
They have the tough loss to Tulane. So they're starting to show a little bit of promise, and we just talked about how good Tulane is playing right now. So when you look at that UTSA team, what will it take for them to be one of those teams with the double-digit number playing in the semifinals?
You remember what I just said about Jamal Mashburn?
Yes.
And letting him be the elite scorer and let him facilitate? Primo Spears is that guy, but I need Primo Spears to do something different. Where I want Jamal Mashburn to be maybe a little bit more selfish and shoot the rock a little bit more because he's hitting at a high clip. I need Primo Spears to play college basketball, not NBA basketball. And what I say by that, I don't want the out of rhythm transition threes because he can hit those. Look at the percentages. He's hitting 40%, 35% from beyond the arc. He's a great free throw shooter, somewhat, I guess 63% is okay. But he's really good across the board and averaging 20 a game. He's a great player, but they have so much length and talent around him. You've got a guy like Horton and Millender who are playing at a high level. Hermes is a defensive force in the paint. He's not going to put up a ton of points, but he's a defensive force. I want Primo to be the guy they run through, not the guy they give the ball to, if that makes sense.
No,
right?
it makes complete sense. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
There you
here.
go.
Yeah.
So I think they've got that element. I don't think they have the depth that these other teams do, like a Temple and a Tulane and what we kind of just talked about of these other middle road teams. UTSA doesn't have that, but what they do, they have a high-end talent like Primo Spears. They've got Marcus Smurf Millender. They call him the Smurf because whenever he came out of the womb, they said he had like a hat on, like the white hat, like a Smurf, and they've called him that throughout his entire life.
That is a great nugget. Did you get that from a coach's call?
Yes, I did. Yeah. So there's that
love
element
that.
to it.
I think that needs to be talked about in the tournament. So make sure we tell whoever's on the call for those
There
games
you go.
about the Smurf.
That's why they call him Smurf,
Okay,
and he
we love
goes
that.
by Smurf, and
I love that.
he was a great player, second in freshman scoring in South Alabama's history, and then made the transfer over to UTSA. He's been tremendous as a sophomore there. And then you've got Horton, Mansato, Hermes as your starting five. That's a pretty good starting five.
Right.
I mean, when you look at the other teams in the conference, they've got 2-3 guys that are probably maybe not elite level players, but they're decent players. I like the starting five from UTSA. I just don't necessarily have a whole lot of faith in the rotation around them. Tayrion Joseph, I think, is a guy that's been a little banged up recently. He's averaging double figures. I think if they can get him back in the fold, I don't know the extent of his injury, but if he's back in the fold, then that's something that I think could be significant. Overall, UTSA has pieces. You just got to put them together the right way.
It's just figuring out where the puzzle pieces actually fit.
Yeah.
And that needs to be figured out by March. But before we get to March, we have a couple of games that are of note in the next few weeks that we want to take a look at. When you look at that slate, what are we circling?
Florida Atlantic Temple down there at the bottom, ESPN2, nationally televised broadcast. Give me Florida Atlantic to upset the Owls in a battle of the Owls.
Battle of the Owls.
I'm making
There
a call
are a
right
lot
now.
of Owls in this conference.
Yeah, Rice is up there too. I don't make a ton of predictions on this show. Sometimes I'll do it on social.
Check out his social.
Yeah.
He's trying to get followers. That's why he's pubbing
Kyle
his social.
_Youmans, Youmans.
And you can angry tweet at him too. I do it sometimes with my burner account.
I would love to do that.
Yeah.
Florida Atlantic, I think they will beat Temple.
Okay.
I think they will beat Temple on the road
All
up
right.
near Broad Street. They're still trying to reel from what happened this past Sunday. I'm hoping everybody's okay up there in Philadelphia. And then
I think they're fine.
You think they're fine?
Yeah.
I don't know. Memphis, South Florida, I think that'll be an interesting one. But Memphis, I think, is just rolling right now.
They look good right now.
I said that earlier. I'm circling the UAB game with Memphis.
Yep.
That's where I'm at there. So some of the great games coming up across the board. And then if we move on, got some other ones. East Carolina, Tulane. I called that game last year down at the Devlin Fieldhouse. I think that's a sneaky good matchup.
Sneaky good.
At some point, I think East Carolina is going to click. You talked about the athleticism and some of the high-flying plays that you've seen along the way from teams like South Florida. I feel like East Carolina's on there every 2 weeks. They just had a buzzer beater the other day.
They had a buzzer beater, and that one, I'm just going to give it away. That one's not in top plays because there's another East Carolina play in there.
My point exactly.
Yes.
Once they put it all together, I think East Carolina is going to find some ways to win. We'll talk more about the Pirates if they can continue to figure it out. That Temple UAB game down there at the bottom.
I'm circling that one. Yeah, that one. I'm excited. Like if Temple can start putting the pieces together, they have the ability to be very good.
Yeah.
And if you get Mashburn playing as you want him to play in that capacity, I want to see the Mashburn head-to-head with Lindeborg in that one. So
that should be fun.
A lot of fun.
It's going to be fun. Here's the thing. You talked about Lindeborg, though.
Yes.
We have Yaxel Lindeborg on the line, one of the best players in the American. Let's talk to him.
Lundemore clean to ram one home. The lane was wide open. He's got the first 5 of the night.
And that was just a bad closeout right there by Schmeichel. And right off that shot fake, Lundemore, who just made a 3, gets right to the rim.
So you make a 3, and then you have a nice slam dunk. So because of that, you get to join All-American. We have UAB's Yaxel Edinburgh joining the show right now. Yaxel, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about that play first off. What did you see on that? Because that looked pretty athletic, and we'll mention your athleticism in just a little bit.
Well, I mean, I knew the closeout would get a little bit more aggressive since I made my first 3. And, I try to make it a little easier for me and try to start making the smarter reads rather than just taking it in the paint all the time and forcing it in. Obviously, that time it worked for me. But, I'm going to try to start with an inside-out attack or outside-in attack, either or.
Yeah, that definitely seemed to work for you, and everything else that you've been doing seems to be working. You're currently averaging a double-double. Your team's playing some great basketball right now, but let's talk about you individually first. What do you think has been working so well for you?
I would say, just taking what the defense is giving me. I've been seeing a lot more doubles and triples than I've seen my whole life. So I've been trying to get adjusted to that, and I'm liking the way that my assists have been, piling up this year. That's always been one of my favorite parts of the game. And hopefully I can continue that type of play.
Well, of course, you had the tournament MVP last year. You were first team all-conference, defensive player of the year, and then named preseason player of the year going into it. So safe to say the expectations were pretty high for you, Yaxel, going into it. So how have you had a better season, even with all those expectations, all those different mentalities going into it? How have you taken your game to the next level from last year to this year?
Well, this summer has really been my first year working on myself, and just taking more time in the gym to, work out. And coach has been putting a lot of, weight on me, and it's been helping me out in a big way because I never thought I'd be in this stardom role, as you can say. And I feel like I've been gelling a little bit better than I was at the beginning of the year. And I'm just glad that it's going on. I'm glad Coach AK put his trust into me.
No doubt about it. And, of course, Coach Kennedy has continued to speak very highly of your work ethic and your mindset when going into it. But tell us a little bit about what that challenge was. Going from the junior college ranks, you had some success as an All-American at the JUCO level, but then making the jump to UAB, finally becoming a part of Kennedy's system and having the success that you have.
Man, the beginning was brutal. My first game at UAB, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think I made a field goal, and I think I missed about 8 free throws. I really feel like we ended up losing that game because of me. But throughout all the bad games that I've had at the beginning of my career, Coach AK just kept his trust in me and kept, believing in me more than I believed in myself, and ended up playing out very well for me. And hopefully I can continue, just keep learning the game, keep getting a little better, more confident, and Coach can keep trusting me. It's been really working wonders for me. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, you've said that a couple times already. Was there a moment, a spot where Coach maybe pulled you aside, you guys had a conversation or a film session that it just clicked for you along the way?
Yeah, during the beginning of the year, we ended up, I think we were 4-5 last year, and it was after a brutal loss to Arkansas State. I think we ended up losing by like 20. That was like the game where I feel like I came out and started playing a little more aggressive, even though we lost. I ended up going back to the locker room, ended up crying. It was a really hard moment for me because I thought it was over. I made the worst mistake I could, and basketball wasn't for me. Coach AK pulls me in, talks to me, just tells me to keep my head up. This always happens to a lot of players, you're better than this, and he sees like greatness in me, and after that like conversation that we've had, I feel like it just brought in some type of animal into me, and gave me that heart that I could really use.
You speak of Coach AK, and there's been other players on your team who have spoken so highly of him and his ability to pull the best out of all of you guys. What has he meant to not only you, but this entire UAB program?
Man, it's huge, because he's been at higher levels as well. He came back to his alma mater. And, having a player coach is always like the best thing you can ask for, to be honest, because he's been in the game, played at a high level, done all he can do, and he sees things that you don't see. And that's really big time for somebody to be in your corner.
Well, he's certainly been helping your teams excel this season as well. You've had a couple big wins, and you have a couple more games coming up. What do you think it has been, especially in conference play, that has helped you guys start clicking in the way that you are?
We're finally getting more in tune with our defensive rotations. That's been a real struggle for us, and Coach AK has been harping on us that our defense was like the worst he's ever had ever. So it's like, when you constantly hear that, it makes you want to play a little bit better on defense, and I feel like we showcased that a little bit better than we had all year against North Texas.
You definitely did. It held them to 61 points, but has that stopped? Has he stopped saying you're the best, you're the worst defense that you've ever had?
No, we hear it every day.
I kind of had a feeling that was the case, knowing Coach Kennedy for a couple years now. What is the level of play like with this team compared to that team last year that went to the NCAA tournament? Where are you guys better? Where can you guys improve going into the postseason over these next few months?
I feel like our team is like, I don't think we're there yet like we were last year. Last year, we really gelled at the end of the year and became like a unity. I don't think we're completely whole this year yet. So I hope that we can, just find out a way to trust each other more, like make the extra pass, even if we, obviously want to score the ball. But the best thing we can do to get better for the end of the season would be, obviously getting connected on defense, being more aggressive, and just taking those shots because we haven't really been making them. But I definitely have a song feeling that we'll start making them when we need them.
Who is the X factor outside of yourself and maybe even some of the higher talked about players on the ball club like a Tony and some of your other teammates? Who's the X factor that's going to be the difference between you guys making a run in March again or maybe not?
I would say Christian Coleman for sure. When he's on, the whole team is on. He brings a light that we really, really, really need. And, whenever there's load on me, he can take it all and just make sure that we get that win.
What's the goal going into the tournament this year?
Be the #1 seed, win the regular season like we were predicted to do. And hopefully by the end of the time, we just become a brotherhood. That's all I've been looking for.
Well, it's been a pleasure getting to talk to you, getting to know you, and watch you play throughout the year. We're big fans here on All-American, continuing to see your growth as well. We wish you nothing but the best down the road. Safe travels. I know you guys are taking on East Carolina this week, and then you've got some travels the rest of the way, and then we'll see you down in Fort Worth at Dickies Arena here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Yaxel Lendeborg, how awesome is he?
He's unbelievable. He's I love how he went back in time and was very vulnerable of the fact that basketball almost wasn't for him. He, out of anybody, should say basketball has been for him. So even him going through those struggles and kind of talking about it, thought it was a really, really cool insight. And, of course, I wish him nothing but the best. I've been a fan of his from afar, calling games over the last couple of years for UAB. And, of course, I've gotten to know Andy Kennedy a little bit over these years too. And everything he says about AK is spot on because he's been around them a lot more and he's continued to grow because of it.
I think that's an interview that I would really encourage a lot of student athletes to go and watch because I think that people don't realize how many student athletes go through exactly what he experienced. And you think that you're all alone and you think, oh, maybe I wasn't meant to be a college athlete. Maybe this isn't for me. And the fact that one of the best players, I'll say in the country, in my opinion, if he can go through that and still be successful, I think that it just gives a lot of hope to pretty much anybody else. So please go and watch that. We'll have to clip some of that for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be available on the YouTube channel. If not, and you can kind of see it yourself. But I will say every time that we go into Yaxel Lendeborg and we talk about Yaxel, I go and look at the NBA mock drafts. And I just expect to see his name on there. Haven't seen it yet. So my message to the NBA is figure it out. Start watching basketball.
We're going to tag you in this.
Yeah, figure it out. He's an NBA prospect. I've seen plenty of them throughout the years. He would be a steal. And, of course, we've seen guys from the American have success. David Jones is with the Mexico City Capitanes in the G League right now, and he's averaging 18 points off of the bench for the Capitanes, and he played with Memphis last year as well. So go get yourself some Yaxel Lendeborg if you're in the NBA. You got some time. All right. It's time for some top plays along the way. We've got 5 of them for you, starting with the softball diamond. Yes, softball is back, everyone, and you know that if there's a diving play, we're going to find it. This one comes from South Florida in the left center field gap. This one tracked down to steal an extra base hit from the Florida Gators. An incredible play. Help me on the name here. It's Alexa Galligani with a phenomenal diving play, taking away a left center field strike. I want to see it again here. Watch this.
Beautiful.
little bit of time, timed it up perfectly, slides with the dive. Were you in the building for this?
I was in the building for this.
How
I watched
about
this
that?
live. Yeah, I watched a lot of softball this weekend.
Did you feel like you could have gotten out there and made that play?
Oh, absolutely. In my prime.
I
Not
figured.
now. Like 5 years ago.
Not right now?
I think I'm a step slower.
I think you would have tracked it down and didn't have to dive.
Yeah.
My opinion.
Yeah, I'm not that fast. Alexa Galgani's a lot
She's a little
faster
quicker.
than I am. But speaking of people who are quick and also very good at their sport, let's head over to the basketball court. PJ Haggerty to Musa Cisse for the alley-oop. Slam dunk. PJ Haggerty scores, but, you know, he can distribute as well. And when you have Musa Cisse just sitting under the basket like that, it makes it pretty easy.
Yeah, we talked about the forward presence from Memphis. This is the forward presence. A little alley-oop in the FedEx Forum. PJ Haggerty not just hitting shots, he's putting it on the money down low. All right, moving on to number 3. Haggerty had the great vision on that pass, but what about the vision on the 3 from Taylor Jamison to the basket, lays it up backwards, not even looking at the rim. Maria gets the job done. No looker.
She didn't need the vision. Haggerty had the vision. She didn't need it.
That's called back of the eyes in the back of the head, like when your mom was mad at you back in the day.
Funny story about that. My grandmother told me that. I was like 5. And
You thought it was real?
Me and my cousins, when she was like taking a nap on the couch, went and looked for the eyes in the back of her head. You know what? That's a different story for a different time. Let's talk about
Thank you, Taylor Jamison, for your great play and your
Let's
layup.
talk about East Carolina because they're in our top plays again. We're going to see a dunk, but it's not from Jordan Riley. It's from C.J. Walker. Complete poster up and over the defender. I think we need to see this again on the replay. Watch this from a better angle. Whew, that's going to be on somebody's bedroom wall, just that poster.
Someone in Greenville is going to have that one ready to go.
Not somebody from Rice, I don't think.
No, I doubt it. No, it's probably not going to go up in the Tudor Fieldhouse anytime soon.
No,
Told you, East Carolina, they've got some athleticism. They're finding their way into top plays almost every single time. All right, next one on the board. We go to number 1 this week, Florida Atlantic. That offense has been about as fun to watch as anybody, especially when they can do that. How about the pass getting shoved away somehow? Baba Miller, I said he was an athletic freak. That's what it takes to pull off a play like this, finding the big man down low for the 2, but it was all about the puree that he hit. Is that what they call it, from like a ballerina puree to hit the pass behind the head?
No, I was actually a ballerina for 11 years. You're learning a lot about me right now. That would probably be more like
Puree?
a pirouette you're thinking
Pirouette.
of.
That's what I was trying to hit.
It may be pirouette. Close. But
Baba Miller got it done.
Baba Miller definitely got it done. We talked about ballet. Now let's talk about some bonus plays. This was so cool, Kyle. There are 2 new women's lacrosse programs in the American Athletic Conference. This is one of them right here.
How
Charlotte.
cool.
Yeah, right? We love women's sports. We're going to add 2 more teams to that. Charlotte got their first win over Gardner-Webb 20-2. So a beautiful debut. And then this
That's
is
a blowout in lacrosse.
a complete blowout.
Yeah.
South Florida also debut win. They're going to give the Gatorade bath to Coach Mindy McCord. They won their game 2, beating Kennesaw State 19-6. So 2 new teams in the American, making the competition just that much more exciting. And
Yeah.
how about that start for both teams?
First program win, and they do so in emphatic fashion. I mean, usually like a 4-5 goal. That's like a
Right.
a basketball game being like a 10-point blowout.
Yeah.
No, they're taking care of business.
Nah, 20-2.
Yeah, that's
Easy money.
That's good stuff from the American, as always. Not just talking about hoops. We're talking about a little bit of everything sprinkled in. Speaking of hoops, we talked a lot of the men's game today. There's a lot to look forward to in the women's side of things as well. We'll talk about them next week, but you've got a showcase to get to. You got to hit the road and get down to San Antonio.
San Antonio, we have UTSA and East Carolina on
Nice.
ESPN Plus, the 4th game of the American Hoop Showcase. So I hope everyone tunes in.
No, that's a fun one. The Convocation Center is going to be rocking for that one. Of course, UTSA, one of the top women's teams in the game right now, and East Carolina's been to the American Conference Tournament Championship in each of the last 2 years. So they will be ready when March comes around. You better believe it, as the Pirates take on the Roadrunners. What times they get started tonight on E+?
7, I think.
7 o'clock. Okay.
I got
you gotta
Eastern and
get on the
Central.
road.
E7 and Eastern, or Central and Eastern have me all confused.
Okay.
I was in the Eastern time zone for too long, but
Way too long.
we love that.
Now we've got her in the Central Time Zone. She's going to make the short trip down I-35.
I'll be
to
there on
San
time. That's all that
Antonio.
matters, you
That's
know.
all that matters. Hope you had fun fun spending your time with us here on All-American. We'll be back next week to talk about the women's game and then the men's game again in 2 weeks as we continue to lead you up to Dickies Arena, Fort Worth, Texas. All trails lead to Fort Worth in the American Conference Tournament coming up in the middle of March. For Zach and Chris in the back, for Maria Trivelpiece, I'm Kyle Youmans. We'll see you next time from Studio A on All-American.